I've never had the occasion to meet Mr. Michelin, but I can assure you that I agree with all of what he says. Much of my speech comes from the content of his thoughts. Today is the anniversary of a very special friend of mine who I collaborated for many, many years on Centesimus Annus in discussions, and the presentation and substance today will come from some of those conversations. His name was Monsignor Thomas J. Heron. He died unexpectedly about 3 years ago today at the young age of 56, but during his priesthood he had the fortunate opportunity to serve Cardinal Ratzinger for 6 years and predicted that he would be elected Pope, which happened subsequent to his death. So I commit this speech and this presentation to his memory. My talk, I provided informal presentation to the Acton Institute, which I'm sure will be in a publication for today's deliberations. However, I'm going to speak informally about the points made in that presentation. The talk is entitled Entrepreneur as a Leaven to Society. My background is as an entrepreneur and also as a philanthropist. And in my 30-plus years of professional experience, I've learned an awful lot, as I'm sure each of you have. And in 1992, I began to speak about Centesimus Annus and then set it aside. So I was delighted that now we have the 16th anniversary yesterday of the issuance of this important encyclical, which really is timeless. And although he refers back, John Paul the Great refers back to Rerum Novarum, written by Pope Leo XIII, it was his intent in the wake of the fall of the Berlin Wall to update society on what had happened, the fall of communism and Marxism and the rise of capitalism. And what he anticipated, because he had lived in communism his entire life, what he anticipated was a global economy which was unfolding in 1991, but which had not really unfolded to the extent that it has today in 2007. I think it is very appropriate that the Acton Institute would study this 15 years later to go into the content of the encyclical and, like in the scriptures, to read it in today's time and to try to interpret it as to today's circumstances and to apply it. Dr. Anton's conversation about China is fascinating, his reference to protectionism. I think China, what's going on in the free enterprise zone, is something very exciting, and we need to spread that throughout the rest of the third world. But if they continue protectionism, it will be a short-lived economic success. It will have setbacks. And we'll talk about that further in my comments. My theme for today is freedom. God, as we heard in the last conversation, made us in His own image and likeness. But the most important gift that He gave to us is free will. He desires our love, but He does not command it. Today we're talking about economic systems. And in economic systems, a command economy, communism and Marxism, doesn't work. It's a good idea, and it might, as my friend Monsignor Heron say, work for Martians, but for human beings that were made in the image and likeness of God, who have total and absolute free will or tendencies to that, they will resist and not perform well in an environment which restricts their free will, their free desires. They have self-interest. They're interested in themselves and in their family. And once that is taken care of, they can give back to the community because they're secure. I have 5 points that I want to talk about in this presentation. They all pretty much start with freedom. One is freedom of association, which rerum novarum, and Centesimus Annus spoke about, but I'm going to speak about it in a different context, really in the context that Mr. Michelin's paper spoke. Free trade among nations. We've seen this in the European Union. We've seen this in North America. We need to see this globally among all states of goodwill. Among all states of goodwill. Freedom of travel. Now, most of my colleagues in the entrepreneur world do not share my views about immigration and freedom of travel, but it's absolutely essential if we are going to have a free and virtuous society, a free market, that we must have freedom of travel, almost equivalent to the freedom of internet that we have today. The world is flat because of internet. We need to flatten it further with freedom of travel. The last 2 points I would like to mention is faith. There's been a disconnect since World War II and maybe beforehand of our faith and our enterprise. In the U.S., and I'm sure in the European countries, faith and business do not go together. They're disassociated. Faith, at a minimum, would be attendance at Mass on Sunday or to your church worship service. But in no place should faith appear in the business enterprise or the public square. This is where we've got ourselves into trouble, and I'm going to discuss that a little bit. Finally, one of the most criticized aspects of capitalism is private wealth. We have one man who is barely over 50, who is, in America, the wealthiest individual in the history of the world. He has accumulated $57 billion of net worth without having inherited one dime, having created knowledge and information, and today has the largest philanthropy foundation, accelerated by the second wealthiest human being on the earth, Warren Buffett. We are going to see some very, very exciting things. They have a larger foundation than the gross national product of most countries. And so this is accumulation of private wealth, the likes of which we've never seen, and I would say the majority of mankind, of academics, and of even business people criticize the accumulation of such massive wealth as inappropriate and exploitation of the less fortunate. And we'll discuss that for a second. So getting back to my first point, freedom of association. The area that the two Holy Fathers spoke about, Pope Leo the 13th and John Paul the Great, were primarily trade union based. Of course, Leo the 13th, entering the Industrial Revolution, needed to address the concern over labor, which was discussed in both of the presentations early. John Paul II had a slightly different spin to it. Of course, he talked about solidarity, which had brought down communism in Poland and ultimately the Berlin Wall without a shot. And both had their appropriate case. I share the view of Mr. Michelin. I believe that there should be freedom of association. It's in the Constitution of the United States. The American experiment is about that. We should be able to freely associate with who we wish. But I believe that it's time, and it has become time, that the corporation should take responsibility to provide that need of association of the employee, of the laborer, with itself. It's the entrepreneur's job to not create an adversary relationship among labor and capital, but to bring all the stakeholders together. And the stakeholders include the client and the shareholders and the laborers, as Mr. Michelin articulated, but it also includes other people. It includes the community, it includes your vendors, it includes anyone who has any relationship with that corporation. Trade unions have served a purpose, but they have also bankrupted complete industries, I know in the United States and here in Europe. They have hijacked industries because through their power, their ability to shut a business down if they do not concede to the demands, they've caused that industry to agree to those demands and then begin the end of a disintegration. Or, in the alternative, a redeployment of those jobs to third world countries where the wages and benefits are affordable. Now, part of that is market. But what we want to do is, instead of developing an adversarial relationship between labor and capital, we must develop a homogeneous relationship. Now, some of this may be a little utopia, but it is always, in my belief, if you can work out a relationship with your employees that is beneficial to them, develop a more long-term relationship with them, they will serve you because they will serve with joy and they will have the dignity that they earned their wage, their retirement, and their lifestyle. Their work is not just about the money. It is about the success that they have, the promotion that they have from within, the ability to better themselves, and to do so in a business enterprise that has ethics and has morality. Second point is freedom of trade. It is a common topic. And Dr. Acton spoke about the protectionism. All of our countries have protectionism still. Even the United States, who has enormous trade. If we want ultimate peace, and I've believed this since I was a teenager, we need to put the wealth in the hands of the business people and out of the hands of the politician. Through multinational corporations, we can influence the local political environment. We can stabilize it. Business people wish for, desire, and pray for peace. They do not want their assets blown up, notwithstanding the insurance policies they may carry on them. They do not want their employees killed in the World Trade Center. This is not what they desire. And so we need to realize that multinational corporations who can freely trade across nation-state borders, then we can expand our economy. Protecting an industry in a country is not healthy for those employees or for that business. We must all be on a level playing field. And we must encourage our local governments, our state and provincial governments, and our nation-state governments to relinquish protectionism, because ultimately it leads to incompetence and inefficiency. Let the market arrest control of the most efficient way to manufacture and deliver services and products both in competence and in price. Freedom of travel. In our country, we have, in the United States, we have 12 million undocumented and illegal aliens. Without them, our economy would be bankrupt. They provide the support to the economy that is being taken from the U.S. economy, and I submit in the European Union, by the original and drastic sin of abortion. They are masking abortion. But we, in the United States, are providing to them an opportunity to work and to provide for their families. This has become a great debate among both parties in the United States, and I know is a debate here in the European Union. People are going to travel into the United States no matter how big or how long of a wall you build. This is their survival. We need to develop a system which allows these individuals with their families to come across nation-state lines and to work and earn a living. Globalism means that we become one family. This isn't going to be in 50 years about an individual nation-state. Here in the European Union, the cultures are being blended together, maybe against most of the participants' wills. But as generations move forward, the idea of nation-state will have less distinct lines, and our children and our grandchildren are going to look for opportunity, ways to unseat those in power. And the way they will accomplish it is by leaving behind these types of problems and difficulties. I want to just cite in my talk a speech that was given by Benedict XVI on March the 30th. The process of globalization going on in the world has brought on a need for mobility, which obliges many young people to emigrate and live far away from their birthplace and from their families. It generates a disquieting sense of insecurity, with repercussions on the ability not only to imagine and adopt a plan for the future, but also to concretely commit oneself to marriage and the formation of the family. This Holy Father and John Paul the Great have spoken to this issue. They realize the necessity to address an orderly transfer of the world's inhabitants among and between nation-state lines. This is not an issue about terrorism. Terrorism will occur regardless of how this is managed. If anything, we'll be able to manage it more efficiently with crossing of lines. This is truly about trying to protect your economy for a concern that people from outside the nation state is going to take a job from somebody inside the nation state. It's also about culture. And we must preserve and protect culture, but it should not be to the detriment of our moving forward, of our life. We can't just look backward to our history. We must look forward to a new world, a world of global economy. The internet and free travel is an essential element of that. Another point within these 3 points is really articulated well for a person close to God but never having lived in a capitalistic society. John Paul the Great discussed the problems of legislation, of over-legislation, and this is something that we really need to protect against in our countries. He cites in Centesimus Annus, where self-interest is violently suppressed, it is replaced by a burdensome system of bureaucratic control which dries up the wellsprings of initiative and creativity. When people think they possess the secret of a perfect social organization which makes evil impossible, they also think they can use any means, including violence and deceit, in order to bring that organization into being. Politics then becomes a secular religion which operates under the illusion of creating paradise in this world. But no political society which possesses its own autonomy and laws can ever be confused with the kingdom of God. Now he's primarily referring to communism and Marxism, the godless economic system. But it also was going on in our capitalistic and pseudo-capitalistic socialistic societies. In our country, we had the Great Society, the New Deal, the welfare state. We took away the dignity of the worker and replaced it with a welfare system that we're now dismantling. It's important to have a safety net for people, but we do not want to provide it as a substitute for work, for ingenuity, for creativity, because we take from them the right that God gave to each individual, the right of free will, the right of private ownership of property, and the right to succeed. In America, when something goes wrong in the economy, when somebody does something bad, we create more legislation so that we'll stop it from ever happening. John Paul said in 1991, we will never succeed. The more legislation and the more restriction we put on free will, the more we reduce our economic viability. Whatever harm we're protecting, we are causing 10, 20, 100 times as much harm, but we really will never know it because it's harm and the loss of an economic growth system. So I would encourage those of us to discourage any legislation, even if it protects our own personal business. It's counterintuitive to the economic free market, and it takes property from people that haven't earned it. It gives it to the government, or it reallocates it to other individuals or other enterprises that don't deserve it. The market ultimately will be perfect, but it does take time. One of the things, as I said earlier, that we've done is faith. There's two aspects to this. One, I think the church is doing a fine job with Centesimus, Annus, and creating a faith formation. We must tell and advise business people, entrepreneurs, people that control corporations that ultimately employ thousands and hundreds of thousands of humans as workers. We must give them a God-centered organization. We must return God to the enterprise. Now, people in my organization know that I am a Catholic, but I open my organization to anyone of any faith. But I also welcome and encourage them to recognize in our mission statements that God exists, that we were created by God with free will, and that we should worship our God in all we do. When we focus ourselves and our employees on God, we will increase our performance and our joy in the work that we do. There's no law in America that says you cannot have God in the marketplace. There's a law that says that you cannot establish an official religion. But practicing a belief in God is not a nation-state official religion. But somehow we've got disconnected and took God out of the marketplace, and He must return. If we expect ourselves to maintain high ethics and standards, we must focus and pray to God, and we must ask that our employees to embrace God in their own faith tradition. Finally, wealth. Many governments, and we see this going on in Russia, I'm sure it's existent in China, are very fearful of private citizens securing enormous wealth and liquidity beyond the government itself. Up until now, up until really World War II, wealth was centered in the hands of government, nobility, and a few select entrepreneurs. Today, wealth is now expanded to everyone in different forms. In the United States, the most common investment is a 401k plan. It's a form of a self-contribution pension plan. Everyone seems to have them. They're all proud of managing their investments. This did not happen in my parents' time. Wealth creation is occurring at a rate more rapid than any time in the history of the world. In the next 25 years, more wealth will transfer from one generation to the next than in the history of the world cumulatively. Most people think this is a problem. We need to tax this wealth. We need to take it back. I submit that the wealth ultimately is what creates the jobs and expands the pie that Mr. Michelin was talking about. We're not talking about sum zero here. We're talking about wealth creation. And if people have wealth, they earned that wealth. Now, we may argue, well, they got lucky, or they were in the right place at the right time. But if they were, ultimately the market will take that wealth back. Either they efficiently use the wealth to deploy it in investment and capital formation and job creation, or the market will take it away from them. That's how it works. It may take 20 years, it may take 30 years, but ultimately the market will take it away from them. What should not occur is that the government takes it away from them, whether arbitrarily, as we've seen in some countries, or through a tax system, whether it be estate taxes or other form of tax system. It's not to say that wealthy shouldn't pay taxes. Absolutely they should. But we shouldn't confiscate wealth. We should reward wealth. Wealth will be the future of our communities. Now, we just have an isolated example in the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where they now have close to $30 billion and are receiving another $30 billion U.S. in donations. What is happening with that money? They're providing a lot of resources to many things. Some of them we may not agree with, but at least they're addressing community needs. Now the government doesn't have to address those needs. And I submit that they will address them 5 to 10 times more efficiently because they will not have the political problems of a government distributing wealth. And they can give back to the community and create wealth. Now this is an isolated circumstance, but in the entire country of the United States, where I'm most familiar, this type of transfer of wealth to charitable foundations, to private foundations, as in the case of the Gates Foundation, but also to universities, to churches, to monasteries, to institutions that they're private as well. They may be non-profit, but they're private as well. John Paul the Great spoke heavily about the need to protect private wealth, and private wealth is the most efficient way to retain wealth and to create jobs for the future. I conclude with another quote from Benedict XVI, who continues to address this same issue. In the context of economic liberalism, conditioned by market pressure, by competence and competitiveness, Benedict XVI recently underlined the need to value the human dimension of labor and to guarantee the dignity of the human person. He correctly states, the final reference point of any human activity can be only the individual, created in the image and likeness of God. Work is part of God's project for the human being and implies a participation in his creative and redemptive work. Therefore, every human activity should be a motive and a place of growth for that individual and for society, a development of personal talents that must be valued, a service oriented toward the common good with a spirit of justice and solidarity. Again, we see that word solidarity. What the Holy Fathers are saying now, 3 Holy Fathers, is that we have a right to have wealth, we have a right to work, and no country, no economic system should have a right to take away or in any way inhibit our free will that God gave to us. There will be mistakes. We were all born in this room with original sin, and we will make mistakes. But overall, goodwill will overwhelm us, and growth and expansion of the economy will result in betterment of those who are laborers and who of the capital will be enhanced. The more legislation restrictions we put on that, the more difficult it will be for that economy. Thank you for listening.